What's going on, guys? Ben with FLX, and if you're watching this video, it means two things. First, you already have your beautiful baby maker like what I have behind me. And the second exciting part is that you've just received your touring package and are watching this to see the installation instructions. Now, before I actually get into the procedures of how to put these components on your bike, it's more important that we get organized first. So if you follow me over here, you'll see that I have everything already laid out. Now, in your touring package box, you'll have a baggie that has all your components. And as you can see right here, I have the rear setup and the front setup as far as the fender mounts and that sort of thing. So these are all the items that you're gonna need to put your bike together. In order to get started, we're gonna start with the fenders. Now, to figure out which is the rear and which is the front, this is pretty simple. All you're gonna do is line them up right here, and as you can see, the shorter one by about 3 inches is going to go to the front side of the bike. Now, the next thing we're gonna do is look at the fender stays. Now, quick note, do not put these black mounts on like we did. It's important that we sort these first before they are applied, so just ignore the fact that I already have them complete. Now, what we want to do in order to figure out which is the rear and which is the front is we're actually going to take all of your fender stays and you're going to line them up, starting with the long side. Now, as you can see here, when they're all in line, the kink starts closer on your front ones. That's how you know these shorter guys right here are going to go on the front of your bike, and the longer ones are gonna go onto the rear of the bike. The next component we're gonna wanna get organized is the actual hardware that secures your fender to the frame of the bike. Now, these bolts are a different size than the rest of them. You can see here they're thicker. They're 5 millimeters thick, and the smaller ones are only 4. So, as you can see here, the shorter one is going to go to the rear, the longer one to the front. In addition to that, the matching hardware that goes on them, the longer bolt that secures it, you can see it fits. The longer one goes to the front of the bike, and the shorter one here goes to the rear. Now, finally, as far as the hardware goes to secure these fenders, they're going to have washers. Now, you're going to see that we have 3 different kinds altogether. To make it easy, the thickest and fattest washer you have is gonna go on the rear of the bike. And then if you compare the size, you'll see that while these have about the same internal circumference, the ones that secure the front fender are larger in diameter compared to these guys. So those are gonna go to the front of the bike. Now, what that leaves you with are 6 bolts and 6 washers. Now, the washers aren't as important. As you can see, they're all the same size. What is important is that you note these 4 millimeter bolts are gonna have 2 shorter ones and 4 longer ones. The 4 longer ones are gonna go to the rear of the bike with 1 washer per each, and the shorter ones are gonna go to the front of the bike with a washer each as well. Now, this is gonna be your setup for the installation. Again, it's real important we get these organized because these parts are specific to certain components of the bike. But now that we've got everything sorted, we can go ahead and start putting them onto the bike. Now, I like to work from the front to the rear of the bike. So what I'm gonna do is grab the front fender along with all the hardware that's used to secure it. Now, taking that shorter front fender, I'm actually gonna work it onto the bike's tire and just let it rest there as I grab the other hardware. And what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna take the longer bolt, I am going to put one of the washers onto it. I am then gonna feed that bolt through the bracket of the front fender. And before I put it into that little slot there, I'm going to take the second washer and actually put it on as a little buffer or spacer so that it doesn't rub directly on the fork here. Now, before installing this piece in, I'm going to take the back bolt that's used to secure it, and if I rotate the tire here, you'll see that it'll fit right in like so. I'm gonna keep my finger pressed down on it to keep it from rotating as I finger tighten the fender down. Now I'm gonna screw this all the way in, but not use my Allen key to tighten it yet because there's still some adjustments that we may need to make. For those of you with a standard Babymaker, the hardware you need to secure the fender is actually already on your bike. So what you're gonna do now is grab your 5mm Allen key, and we're gonna go ahead and start this process. In order to utilize the hardware that's already on the bike, we're gonna have to loosen a few things for those of you with a standard. What you're gonna do is take your 5mm Allen key and actually loosen this bolt right here. Now, I have a special tool, so this might go a little bit quicker for me, but the process is essentially the same. What you're gonna do is loosen this guy right here. Now I'm gonna turn my tire so you can kind of see what's happening. As we loosen this, your caliper is gonna become free. So, as you see here, I'm able to pull this away from the bike. Now, being sure that this bolt stays in the back right here, we're gonna go ahead and start the installation process. So again, you wanna make sure that's in the back here, and then you're gonna take these two washers off of that bolt. You're gonna feed in that shorter front fender, put it in, and then reinsert these ribbed washers right here, like so. And then again, making sure this bolt stays in the back. We're gonna feed everything back in, and using that 5mm Allen key, we're gonna torque it down, but not all the way. We're gonna leave a little bit of a play here. So go ahead and do that now, and then follow along with the rest of the instructions. Even though we've already sorted the rear and the front fender stays, there's also a right and a left one. So to figure that out, we're gonna hold them by the long edges. And what we want to happen is if we line them up like this, we want them to come into each other, forming a slight circle. That's how you know which one's your left and which one is your right. If you put them together and they spread out at the end, like the shape of a Y, that's incorrect. So we're gonna rotate these, and that's how we establish the left and the right fender stay. Now that we've established what side the fender stay goes on, we're actually gonna attach these little black brackets on the top. So if you pretend like it's secured onto the bike already, you want the C portion facing towards the bike. And what this is gonna allow you to do is actually slide this little securing clamp onto the fender itself and move it down towards the bottom of the fender. As you can see, once everything's secured, this is what's gonna keep it in place. Now that it's on, what I'm gonna do is actually take the smaller of the bolts that you use for the front, and now you may need to open up your quick release or your through axle to do this portion. But then what you're gonna do is put that smaller washer onto the smaller bolt here, and then using the hole of the fender stay, we're actually gonna hand tighten this down. Again, we don't secure anything with our Allen key until the fender is set. So I'm just doing this to get it into place here so we can work on the other side. All right, now that that's in place, everything's nice and loose, we're gonna go ahead and do the same for the flip side. Now that we have everything hand tightened, you'll see that there's a lot of play, and this is actually good because we wanna make sure our clearance is good between the fender and the tire, as well as the alignment. Now the first thing we're actually gonna torque down is gonna be this top bolt up here that secures the fender to the top of the fork. Now what I like to do is actually put my finger underneath here to make sure that there's a good amount of clearance, and then using the 5mm Allen key, we're gonna go ahead and tighten this down. Now one thing to note, that as you're tightening, you may need to place a finger on the back here initially to stop the back end from spinning. But as you can see, mine is pretty good, so I'm gonna go ahead and just keeping that clearance up top, torque this down. Now while I was doing that, I was making sure that it is in line with the back tire. But once everything's set up top, we can then make our way to these fender stays themselves. Now we haven't screwed in these little pieces into the bracket yet, because what you may find is that you need to slide these up and down until you get the right amount of fender clearance. Again, we want it to be even from top to bottom, and we want to make sure that it's not rubbing left or right. So once you find that sweet spot, what you can then do is take your 4mm Allen key, like I'm doing right now, and then go ahead and torque these down the rest of the way. Now with these bolts torqued down on both sides, we can finally take our screwdriver and set these brackets into place, ensuring that this is secure and this fender isn't gonna go anywhere. One quick thing to note is that you may need to play with the fender a little bit. I got really lucky and everything aligned perfectly, but don't be scared to come in here and give these fender stays a little bit of a bend if you find out that you can't get this fender perfectly in line. Again, you don't want to force anything, but they are pretty malleable, so if you find that it's not in line right off the bat, you can give it a little wiggle and it should be good. Once you've torqued down your caliper all the way, you may find that your pad is rubbing on one of the sides or that it's not directly centered. That's fine. As long as you haven't over-tightened this, you can actually move this over so that the spacing between the pad and the rim is the same on both sides. So as you can see here, I'm using my fingers to center this up, and then you should be good to go. With the front fender installed, we can go ahead and work our way to the rear of the bike. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and grab the fender along with the hardware that secures it. That small 5mm bolt, the thickest of the washers, and finally the bracket in the back to secure it. Now, just like we did with the front, what we're gonna do is set it onto the tire. Now this one is actually gonna go in front of this little piece in the seat stay right here. We're just gonna rest it nicely. And like we've done for all these bolts, we're going to put the washer on. And then the same thing with the front. We're gonna take that little guy, stick it in the back here while keeping pressure with our back finger so that it doesn't spin. We're gonna go ahead and hand tighten this down. Now, unlike a lot of the other parts and procedures for this, we're actually gonna go ahead and torque this back fender down. The reason being is because this needs to be installed and secured before we put the cargo rack. So just like the front fender, I'm gonna put my finger underneath to make sure there's clearance. I'm going to make sure that the fender is in line with the back tire as well. And then while I keep that clearance, I'm gonna go ahead and use that 5mm Allen key and torque it down all the way. If you have a standard Babymaker, the procedure here is gonna be the same, but again, you're gonna have the hardware pre-installed. So what we're gonna do in order to secure this rear fender is take your 5mm Allen key, and we're gonna go ahead and loosen this back bolt here. Again, our caliper is gonna come loose, just like so. We're gonna make sure that this back bolt right here stays in, as well as these two rib washers on the caliper itself. And then, much like we did with the front, we're gonna insert our fender. This time, it's okay if the fender goes against the frame. You can put it in front or behind the washers for this particular part, but I'm gonna get this guy in here, like so. And again, we're gonna feed this hardware that's already on your brake caliper back into the bike. And we're gonna finger tighten it down like this. And then again, before we torque it down, we wanna make sure that it's in line both front and back and left to right. Once we have the position and the clearance underneath the tire that we like, we can now go ahead and take our Allen key and torque this guy down all the way. Just like with the front fender stays, we need to establish the left and the right for the rear of the bike. Again, we are going to put them both together, and as you can see, they are concave towards each other. Again, if they form a Y, that is incorrect. We want them to come together towards each other, and that's how we establish the right and the left fender stay. With the left and right fender stays established, we can then go ahead and put on this little securing piece for the fender itself. Again, at this point in time, you should not have put it on yet. The reason is because you wanna make sure that you know which side of the bike it goes on. And once you do, just like we did with the front, we're gonna angle this little clamp towards the fender itself. And what this will allow you to do is feed it into the fender itself and move it to the back. Now in this particular case, we're just gonna let it hang here while we do the other side as well, because we're gonna need to put the cargo rack on first before we actually secure the end of this fender stay. Now that the fender stays are in place, we can go ahead and grab the cargo rack and the remaining hardware. What you should have left is 4 of those smaller bolts and 4 washers. Now what I've already gone ahead and done is put those washers on each of these so that we can go ahead and start the installation process for this rack. Now what I'm gonna do is get it in about the right spot, and then working my way from the top down, I'm actually gonna come in here first, and again, like we've done for everything, we're gonna hand tighten these top 2 bolts. So I'm gonna do the right side, and I'm gonna do the left side as well. Now, you may notice when installing this, that the rack itself may be a little bit too wide, and that's normal. What we want is it to be wide so that when we torque it down, it's nice and secure. So if there's a little bit of left and right play with your rack, that's totally normal. With the top end secure, we can make our way towards the bottom. Now remember, we've left these two things floating here because we want to put them on the outside of the cargo rack. Now with the remaining 2 bolts and the washers on the inside, we're actually gonna go ahead and again hand tighten this guy down. Again, the fender stay is gonna be on the outside, and you may need to jiggle everything around a little bit to get it started. But once that's done, we're gonna go ahead and make our way and do the same thing on the other side. At this point in time, the only thing you should have torqued down is this top fender bolt right here. And the reason being is because we need to set our clearance now. Again, these are still loose. What we wanna do is actually look, and as you can see here, this fender is rubbing on the back tire. So what you may find for this rear one is that you need to slide these brackets up. Now, as you can see, once I slid them up, I can fit my whole finger underneath here for clearance. It's about even across the top. Once you find that everything is at an acceptable level and it's in line with the back tire, we can go ahead and first start by torquing down these bottom fender stays. And once it's nice and tight, on both sides, we'll go towards the top as well, finally finishing off just like we did and securing these screws here. Now again, you may find that you need to give it a little elbow grease, bend these left and right if you find that they're not perfectly aligned, but since mine's good to go, I'm gonna go ahead and tighten everything down now. If you've made it to this point in the video, 90% of your work is done. We have both front and rear fenders on the bike along with the cargo rack. This is gonna be great for you guys who do a lot of commuting and have to ride and can't really only go out when there's only fair weather. This is gonna help keep you dry and also enable you to carry more along with you. Now there are still a couple other items in your touring package, one of which is the cell phone mount. That is designed to go on the front handlebars, and you can put it on the left or right side, whatever is most comfortable for you. This will allow you to use your GPS when riding and help you go further and not get lost. Although sometimes the point of riding is just to get lost, but with that you have the option. Now another one of the items in that touring kit that you just received is gonna be your front and rear tail lights. Now these are able to charge via USB port, and they're not necessarily so that you can see, but more so that other cars can see you. A very important thing when you're out riding on public roads and there's cars around. The last thing you have is the water bottle mount. Now, what I recommend is that you put it on the seat tube end of your bike. And the reason being is that the bolts up front are used to secure your battery. So always mount it to the seat tube first. If you find that you want to run with dual water bottle racks, you may need to pick up different hardware for the front to make sure that your battery is torqued down. So that's it, guys. That is how to install the touring package on your Babymaker. If you have any questions, feedback, or anything along those lines, please feel free to shoot us an email to support@flx.bike, and we'd be happy to help you out. Thanks, guys.